everybody. I'm Lucy O'Brien, and I'm the Chair of Trustees of the Royal Institute of Philosophy, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here to Haberdashers' Hall for the third year of the Nayef Al-Rodhan Book Prize, a prize in transdisciplinary philosophy. Unfortunately, Professor Al-Rodhan couldn't be here. However, we are here to take part in the proceedings our academic director, Professor Edward Harcourt, and the chair of judges, Constantine Sanders. We're also delighted to welcome the authors and the judging panel and their guests. Before moving on to the main and most interesting business of the evening, I just want to remind you a little bit about the Royal Institute and what it does. The Royal Institute reached the grand age of 100 in April this year, and it's doing more than it ever has. We celebrated our birthday with 70 long-term supporters and advocates of the Institute at Middle Temple, in the very same room that the Institute was founded. We didn't quite have 70 glasses of Prosecco, but we had a good few. We continue to publish our journals, Philosophy and Think, and we also publish the proceedings of the London lectures as supplements. This year's centenary lectures are on philosophy in retrospect and prospect, so do look out for them. So we're asking academics, philosophers in various fields to think about where their subject has been, where their area has been, and where it might be going. If you can't attend in person, they're available both on video and in podcasts. On top of this, we have our 4 city lectures and our annual symposium. This year's symposium is on Has There Been Moral Progress? And it's taking place tomorrow at the King's College campus. So I think it might be the first time we're south of the river, so that's thrilling. We run a large partnership program last year. 30 partners delivered 168 events to some 2,600 members of the public. We taught philosophy in schools. Over 1,200 pupils were introduced to philosophy in 94 schools, with 4 schools running philosophy conferences. An astonishing 740 students submitted essays to our Think Essay Prize for 15 to 18-year-olds. As you can imagine, finding enough judges to judge 740 essays was quite a task. We did it. We've taught philosophy in prisons, and this year tutors will deliver philosophy education to students in HMP Swaleside, HMP Highdown, and HMP Wormwood Scrubs. That said, we couldn't fund all the requests that were made to us. We had prisons wanting prison programs, but we didn't have enough in the bank for that, or at least in the budget. We've awarded studentships and bursaries to 13 graduate students this year. And perhaps most exciting and gratifying is the steady growth in our membership scheme. We now have over 300 members, so it's creeping back up. We're sort of hoping to get back to the numbers that we had in the last century, over 1,000. So if you're not a member, please sign up. And finally, of course, we run the Nayef Al-Rodhan Prize in Transdisciplinary Philosophy, the prize that we're here to award and celebrate this evening. Professor Al-Rodhan, who started his professional life as a neuroscientist and neurosurgeon in the US, has come to work more in philosophy and think about its role in tackling the big problems that we all face. He believes in the power of philosophy working with other disciplines to effect change. As he puts it in his manifesto for transdisciplinary philosophy, transdisciplinary philosophy is a call for a broader, more inclusive approach to thinking and acting in the world. It's an intellectual approach for addressing complex global challenges by transcending the boundaries of traditional academic disciplines and integrating knowledge and methods from diverse fields such as philosophy, science, neuroscience, disruptive technologies, social science, international relations, and the humanities. And he adds, to remain on the front foot, the world needs highly trained disciplinary thinkers, including philosophers, who can connect the dots between the various academic disciplines. The Royal Institute, in keeping with its founders, shares Professor Al-Rodhan's commitment to untrammeled philosophy, to bring it into dialogue with other disciplines and with the wider public more generally. We support real philosophy in all its complexity and difficulty and make it available to everyone. My colleague Fiona Lee used to have a little notice on her office door. Sadly, she's moved and I miss it every day. There's a little notice, a little quote from Plato that said, "Fine things are difficult." Fine things are difficult, but they should also be shared, is our view. So in this centenary year, we seek to grow our membership yet further and attract funding and donors for our vital project. Please become a member, as I said, and we're setting up 2 new special interest memberships in law and AI. Let me know if you're interested in being a special interest group member, or if you're interested in supporting our work more generally. So that is the Royal Institute. That is what we do. But we are here tonight to celebrate the prize. And to do that, I'm now going to hand over to Constantine, who will take over from me.
Thank you so much, Lucy. This time last year, I didn't need glasses, or I thought I didn't need glasses, but I'm now, I think, a proper member of the Royal Institute of Philosophy. A large prize like this, of which this ceremony is but the most visible tip, requires a huge amount of effort and coordination from many people. As I only have a few minutes right now, I would like to focus on thanking as many of them as I can. At TRIP, I would especially like to thank Anissa, Melanie, Julia, Lucy, and Edward, who all helped in ways that would take up the whole evening to list. It's common to say that people worked tirelessly, but I'm sure they were all very tired, actually, at various points. Then there's the amazing panel, only some of whom can be here tonight. The rest were probably stuck in an avalanche of books that were coming in through their mailboxes. Lisa Bortolotti and Jude Brown couldn't be here. Francesca Cacucci is here. Alexis Papazoglou is here. Barry Smith is here. Unfortunately, Lambros Marfouris couldn't make it, but I thank them all equally, and those present a little more. I'd also like to thank Nayef Al-Rodhan, who, as we heard, cannot be here today. He's actually chairing an event in Geneva in the morning on transformative technologies and security, but his assistant, Philip Boyce, is somewhere here. These glasses, I can only actually see the text, so I can't see any of you right now. And he's been instrumental in setting up this prize with TRIP and helping along the way. So thank you so much, Philip. Most importantly, no offense to everyone I've thanked so far, I'd like to thank all of the publishers who sent in books on behalf of authors, and of course, the authors for writing philosophy books that are not confined by traditional disciplinary boundaries. These, of course, include the 5 books shortlisted for tonight's prize. In a moment, Professor Edward Harcourt shall do a deep dive into each one of these books with the authors. And so I'm just going to go by order of brochure. If Manuel Almagro, author of The Rise of Polarization, Affects Politics and Philosophy, if you could take a seat. Thank you, Manuel. And I hope you've seen downstairs, there's copies of books, and you can also, there's a QR code that takes you to the website and so on. Jonathan Birch, author of The Edge of Sentience, Risk and Precaution in Humans, Other Animals, and AI. You can take a seat, Jonathan. Jules Holroyd, author of Oppressive Praise. No subtitle, Jules. No. I don't know if that was oppressive praise. Thank you. Peter Godfrey Smith can't make it here. He authored Living on Earth, Life, Consciousness, and the Making of the Natural World, but Edward will tell us more about this in a moment. And Adam Lovett, author of Democracy Failures and the Ethics of Democracy. Thank you all so much. I really loved reading your book. Thank you. And I'll leave you to Edward.
Thank you. Thank you, Constantine. Well, lovely to have you all here. I'm going to ask each of you at most 3 questions, depending on the length of your answers, but I promise I won't ask you more than 3. Peter Godfrey Smith can't be here because for the very good reason that he's in Australia. But I did email him some questions, and I'm going to read out my questions and his answers, and then I will move over to the people we've actually got in the hall. So, in accordance with what I said, it's just 3. Those of you who haven't read the book, I hope you can figure out what I'm talking about from the question. But at one point, I say, you describe the arrow-making practices of some inhabitants of the Tierra del Fuego, with various complicated loops that are hard to make sense of because they don't seem necessary to making an arrow that works. But lots of human activities, ritual activities especially perhaps, don't seem to be means to any end. Are you looking at human activity through an over-instrumental lens? And if so, what's the overall goal that the non-pointless activities subserve? Peter says, I agree that human life is full of ritual activity, much of which might naturally be interpreted in relation to social functions of diverse kinds, bonding, the management of group activity, celebration, and the like. I do find the anthropologist Joe Henrich's work in this area very impressive, and I wanted to gently raise the possibility that he has an overly instrumental view of human social life. His emphasis is on how powerful cultural transmission is as a means for solving instrumental problems. The arrow story, and here's a little detail of it, if you're a member of this people on the Tierra del Fuego, right-handed archers should use arrow feathers from the left wing of a goose, remember that, I see as his possible riposte to those who underestimate the instrumental power of obscure cultural traditions. Next question. When considering the idea that birds and not primates might have given rise to the most complex and evolved species, I ask, you invoke Nietzsche's distinction between the Apollonian and the Dionysiac. Birds are Apollonian, and primates, including ourselves, are Dionysiac, Dionysus being the god of, quote, intoxication and ritual madness. In general, your story says a lot about how good we are at planning, coordination, etc., but doesn't make room for the distinctively human forms of irrationality. Is that because you don't see them as significant? And Peter replies, I'm not sure what counts as irrationality here. By some standards, the extravagant displays and dances that we see in birds and in humans might count as irrational. But they do have important roles. In the book, I wanted the chapter that focuses on birds to lead into the discussion of humans in the following chapter and prime us for an understanding of the aesthetic side of animal life. That side of life is important in both the Apollonian birds and the Dionysian primates. And then finally, changing the subject, I say the following. You explore the idea that consciousness might be essentially biological because it's enabled by holistic features of our biology, specifically of our brains. This contrasts with the picture of consciousness according to which it stands to the brain as software to hardware, and so might conceivably be run on hardware that's artificially constructed. But you also say that there are other aspects of human-mindedness that could be reproduced by something artificial running a very complex computer program. Have I got you right? And what are the implications for the possibilities of artificial general intelligence, a concept that doesn't seem to build in the duality which your thinking does? And Peter says, if I'm right about the physical basis of consciousness, then there is a barrier to our creating a conscious artificial system without first creating a new kind of hardware that is more brain-like. The same does not apply to artificial general intelligence. This might be created using present-day computer hardware. I don't know how close we are to AGI, but I think there is more of an in-principle barrier involved in artificial consciousness. So that's Peter's responses. And now Constantine read out the names of the shortlisted authors in alphabetical order. I'm going to do them in a slightly different order because it makes more sense thematically. So I'm going to begin with you, Jonathan, and here's a mic for you. So in your book, The Edge of Sentience, you're asking about how do we identify sentience in other entities. Is it always a question of how can we know, as opposed to there's no right answer, like whether some shade of colour is red or orange?
Yeah, thanks, Edward. Thanks for the tough questions. Now I see how tough these questions are. I see why Peter Godfrey Smith wanted to hide in Australia rather than coming here to answer them in the room. I think that in The Edge of Sentience, I'm trying to build broad coalitions around what I see as common sense precautions, where we're faced with real uncertainty about what to do because we are uncertain about whether a being is sentient or not. The first sort of cases I was thinking about were cases like crabs and lobsters and so on, where I see this long history of extremely reckless, negligent treatment of these animals because people simply dismissed the idea that they could be feeling anything when they're dropped into pans of boiling water. And you're raising the question of, well, is it just uncertainty, or could there be genuine borderline cases where there might be no fact of the matter? So we're familiar with this in other contexts, famously the context of baldness, where I think, for many years I was a borderline case, and now sadly I'm not. I think I might be unambiguous now. But there are these concepts where there may be no fact of the matter because you're in the borderline region, like no exact number of hairs, where there's this sharp transition from bald to not bald. And Peter Godfrey Smith has suggested that consciousness might be like that as well. Sentience might be like that as well. That there might be no sharp line in nature between the systems that are capable of subjective experience and the ones that are not. And really that's often tended to be a point of disagreement between me and Peter, because he thinks there's no problem there with the borderline cases. And I think on the face of it, there is a problem. There is a problem because when we're talking about consciousness and sentience, well, there's all kinds of ways in which one form of it might be more complex than another form. Maybe in some respects, our experience is more complex than that of a bee. Maybe there's other respects in which the bee's experience is more complex than ours. But what we're talking about here is the idea of there being a borderline case of whether there's anything it's like to be the animal at all. And to me, I really struggle to make sense of that idea. I'm not sure that I can conceive of there being no fact of the matter about whether there's something it's like to be a bee or not. I conceive of both sides, but not there being no fact of the matter.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question. So there's an impressive story near the beginning of the book about a lady called Kate Bainbridge, who was suffering from some, I think, impairment of her capacity to move, and it was not discovered until she recovered that she was actually feeling stuff all the time. You say, I fear we may achieve artificial sentience long before we realize we've done so. Isn't the basic guide to sentience some sort of behavioral sign, such as differential sensitivity to the environment? If that's so, how could we be that wrong about whether a type of entity, not just an individual like poor Kate Bainbridge, is sentient or not?
Yeah, I mean, the book is about the whole family of cases at the edge of sentience, as I call it, where we're really unsure what to do. We face these big practical challenges because we're so unsure about whether there's sentience there or not. And it was really important to me to discuss the whole family of cases together, including animals like crabs and lobsters and octopuses and bees, and human cases, like the case Edward alluded to, and also the emerging debates around AI and the possibility of sentience in AI. Those human cases, very moving, really. And I'm grateful to Kate Bainbridge for responding to my queries and giving me permission to include a case in the book. It is an absolutely extraordinary case because for a time, doctors had written her off, in effect. That there's this long tradition when a patient is unresponsive after brain injury of doctors thinking, well, they're not feeling anything. And in fact, in this case, the patient not only recovered to a point where she could communicate, but when she did, what she communicated was that she'd been feeling things all the time. And so when doctors had been performing procedures during those, I think it was about 6 months, where she didn't understand what was going on, and there was lots of pain and discomfort involved, and she wasn't being given any pain relief. She was able to subsequently report that, and it changed clinical practice because it was so shocking. And people are coming round to the view that actually, in quite a lot of these cases, and we don't know how many, people estimate around 20% perhaps, there might be no responsiveness at all, but there might be continuing consciousness. Of course, we've got to err on the side of caution in these cases, and in fact, the medical profession needs to do quite a bit more than it has done so far to properly err on the side of caution, I argue in the book. And then, yes, when we turn to these emerging debates around AI, it's very, very different. It's almost like a mirror image because we're overwhelmed by the amount of talking they do. There's so much communication, there's so much language. And so what we used to describe as being the clearest sign of sentience in many of these human cases, we're now becoming a lot more skeptical about. Partly because from what we do know about how these systems work, we know that they are play acting. We know that they are incredibly skillfully mimicking the dispositions of a helpful human assistant. And so those criteria for sentience that we've developed for use in other contexts, they're being gamed. They're no longer reliable in that context. And so that's why even when users develop this incredibly strong conviction that the chatbot is sentient, really they're tragically being taken in by a kind of play acting.
Great, thank you. Last question. So you say modestly that you're not auditioning for the role of sentience Tsar, but I was surprised by the confidence that you place in citizens' juries. If the questions are so difficult, why would popular opinion be the appropriate method for tracking the truth? And I'm just thinking about the trouble that Jamie Oliver got into with trying to introduce healthy school lunches and, parents passing bags of chips and so on through the school gates because they were not having their kids fed on this healthy stuff. I mean, what makes you think that the sort of enlightened views about factory farming and so on will be taken by citizens' juries?
Yeah, I mean, the Royal Institute of Philosophy believes in the public, right? Which I'm sure
we love trying to educate the public in philosophy.
Of the public in their more reflective moments. Yeah, so I mean, if the role of sentient czar is going, I'll take it. I wouldn't want to count myself out. But yes, one of the big themes of the book was that we should not look to philosophers to dictate what to do in these cases. They are very hard cases, but the ethical issues are ones that we need to involve the public in. So those clinical norms around how to treat people with disorders of consciousness, the norms around animal welfare and how far we go in terms of expanding protections to animals like crabs, lobsters, octopuses, insects, and what we do about these emerging debates around AI. They concern all of us. We have to involve the public in setting public policy in these issues. And I very strongly believe that when we have value conflicts in a democratic society, we need to find ways of resolving them democratically. And then in the book, I argue for an optimistic view about citizens' assemblies as the mechanism that can do this. These are issues that they're never going to be very prominent in election campaigns. And much as I would like a party to be campaigning on a manifesto of bee protection, it's not realistically going to be the most salient issue in a general election campaign. And so electoral politics is never going to do justice to these issues. But sometimes when you have a complex issue where it's not going to be dealt with properly by politics as usual, everyone can see that. You have strong reasons to departisanize it, which is to say, take it out of the run of party politics. And when it's the sort of issue that, it is about, you can inform a panel of members of the public, and these citizens' assemblies usually have a few hundred members of the public. You can inform them about the issues, you can give them a range of options, and you can ask them to debate proportionality. What would be proportionate? How far should we go in protecting crabs, for example? In those exercises, you're getting the public at their best.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting people in a situation where they've got time to think. They've got time to deliberate, time to discuss the issues, time to reach a considered view. And these exercises, I'm quite heartened by what I've seen from those I've been involved in and from those I've witnessed from the outside. You can get surprisingly sensible, surprisingly well-reasoned, pretty good recommendations out of these panels that command public confidence because they've come from not experts, but from a group of ordinary people. So I think this is mostly a underexplored mechanism. We'll hear what Adam thinks about these things, I'm sure, when his book is about democracy. I think it's an underexplored mechanism in democratic societies. And to me, it is a really good way to get some change done on these issues.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So, Jules Holroyd, I'm going to move on to you next. Your book is entitled Oppressive Praise. One of the book's ambitions, you say, is how we might resist oppressive praise. You want to explore that. Now, I can resist oppressive praise by saying something like, forgive the coarseness of the expression, you know where you can shove your praise. How does philosophy enable me to go beyond that?
Thanks. Well, one of the aims of the book was just to get the phenomenon of oppressive praise on the table, because it seemed to me that there was quite a widespread assumption that praise was a benefit to its recipient, and that had meant that praise hadn't been given a huge amount of attention in the philosophical literature. So identifying instances in which it might be oppressive seemed like a really important first step, so that we can at least perhaps make some headway in diagnosing those cases where it is problematic. So I think philosophy can help in resisting praise, firstly by helping us sketch the contours of the phenomenon so that people can identify it. But then when it comes to resisting oppressive praise, I mean, I found a range of philosophical frameworks from social philosophy to be quite helpful in thinking about the sorts of resources we might helpfully bring to resisting oppressive praise. So firstly, I found work from feminist philosophy, Iris Marion Young's conception of oppression, helpful in enabling me to kind of identify the different ways in which praise might be oppressive. And in particular, to think about it as not just a problem that occurs in specific interactions between two people, there's an expression of praise, but that it's the patterns of praise that are problematic, and that it can be quite helpful to think of praise, therefore, as an oppressive praise in particular as one kind of structural injustice, or as part of a pattern of structural injustice. And I think that's helpful because when we're thinking about how to resist oppressive praise, then we need to think not just what an individual can say to the person expressing praise, where to shove their praise, but also to think about what's needed more broadly in terms of unpicking the dynamics of oppression that contribute to those patterns of praise, not just in the instance in which it's expressed, but sort of prior to that, the stereotypes that inform praise and that get entrenched when it's expressed.
Thank you. You give a number of compelling examples of how praise can go wrong and even be harmful. But is all harmful praise also oppressive? So I was thinking about the sycophantic praise directed to the tyrant by the tyrannized. It seems eccentric to say that the tyrannized person is oppressed by the... I mean, nobody's being done any good by that handing out of praise, but seems to get the oppressed-oppressor relationship the wrong way around.
Yes, that's really helpful because I wanted to isolate from, I think, perhaps a very broad class of potentially harmful praise, the phenomenon of oppressive praise. So I think I agree. Praise could be harmful in various ways. And in fact, when I was looking at social psychologists' work on this, they were worried about ways in which praise might harm the self-esteem of the recipient, the way in which it might cultivate narcissistic tendencies. So those are all ways in which praise could be harmful without necessarily being oppressive.
Right.
What I wanted to do was identify some of the key characteristics that might manifest in instances of oppressive praise. So cases where somebody was celebrated or lauded for meeting or going beyond expectations, where those expectations have been informed by stereotypes. And then I tried to sort of tease out in the book the particular kinds of oppression that might be implicated in. So using Iris Marion Young's framework, the 5 faces of oppression, I was interested to characterize those kinds of stereotype-informed expectations as forms of cultural imperialism being seen through the lens of the dominant group, and to tease out the way in which patterns of oppressive praise might sort of end up entrenching positions of marginalization. That's another one of her faces of oppression. And also be implicated in perpetuating certain kinds of powerlessness, which can include sort of limitations on the development of one's moral capacities.
Great, thank you. So you're thinking, for example, of praising a woman for doing really brilliant housework when in fact she doesn't value it, and that leaves her stuck in a conventional role that she doesn't want to be in. I think that was one of your examples. So last question. Praise is a distinctive speech act. But is the distinctiveness of the speech act itself essential to the badness of oppressive praise? Or is the badness of oppressive praise just part of the badness of being misunderstood?
Good question. Yeah. Before I answer it,
Yes.
I want to just go back and add a clarification to the example that you gave about high praise for housework. Because in fact, I think that's the kind of case that in a range of studies it's been suggested that when women meet those high expectations that they're held to, they don't get praised precisely because of those high expectations. They ought to be doing that, and it's expected predictively that they will. So they're more likely to be blamed for not doing that.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Whereas when men do a little bit of housework, praise be. So and those are the patterns that get found in social psychology, but I expect they might be familiar to some people from their daily lives. So the question about the bad of oppressive praise. I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Well, the thought is, so I'm not trying to quarrel with the idea that oppressive praise is bad, but since praise is a very distinctive kind of speech act, I'm just wondering how important a role the distinctiveness of that speech act plays in the badness of oppressive praise, because some people might think that there's a more general bad of being misunderstood. So somebody claims that what you're doing is really valuable, actually you don't find it valuable. And you can do that without using the speech act of praise. You can do it in any number of sort of discursive forms.
Okay, good, thanks. So in the book, I actually steer away from thinking about praise in particular as a speech act, partly because I'm not sure that the framework of speech acts is always going to sort of helpfully capture everything that I wanted to say about praise. So I ended up trying to give a more functionalist account, whereby we can identify and analyze praise in terms of what it does. And one of the key things that I argue that it does is, and this is what makes it really valuable to us, it allows us to affirm certain values, the things that we explicitly celebrate and promote, but it also presupposes certain evaluative frameworks, and it's those presupposed evaluative frameworks where I think there's often the oppressive expectations and stereotypes informing the expression of praise. So within that context, then I guess the question would be, when praise is serving that function, is there more to the bad of it being the function of celebrating certain values and presupposing certain wider problematic evaluative frameworks than just being kind of misunderstood or misappraised? And I think there is something distinctive about the fact that it's praise that's doing these things, because I think that's what makes it hard to identify and to resist. Praise is, even in these cases of oppressive praise, often well-intentioned, and people are trying to do a nice thing.
Yes.
And it's quite disruptive and difficult, I think, and can be perceived as churlish or ungrateful. If one doesn't accept the praise, there are quite strong conventions of humble self-deprecation in accepting praise. And so I think the fact that these kinds of misapprehensions and problematic stereotypes that are expressed in praise are part of what makes them so pernicious.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to turn next to Manuel Almagro and your book, The Rise of Polarization. Your book explores the psychological mechanisms behind what you call affective polarization. Now, it struck me that some of those mechanisms are kind of standing features of human psychology. So let's suppose you've got the mechanisms right. One wants to ask why the mechanisms operate more powerfully now, which I think you think they do, than they did, let's say, 3 decades ago.
Yep, thanks a lot. I mean, I think there is actually a part on the book where I discuss some psychological mechanisms involved in this process of public opinion polarization or affective polarization more in particular, but I'm not completely sure about whether I would like to commit to the idea that what is involved here is just psychological, because one of the parts I think it's playing a very important role in this process of affective polarization is how certain political actors can craft very compelling narratives that connect with certain experiences and how that but what I want to say is that I tend to conceive this in more in social terms, not only in psychological terms. So there is a psychological dimension here involved because, for example, the work of Kevin Dorst shows that the way in which people process the information they receive, even those that we tend to think that they are doing that process in a bad way, they are actually pretty rational, and the mechanisms involved are the normal ones, and that's true. But despite the fact that that's true, there is also, I think, a social dimension that might be even more important to understand properly. If I'm right in the book, maybe I'm not.
Okay.
But yeah, so I tend to think about this process not only in the psychological way. So.
Social, not psychological.
Yeah,
okay, well that segues neatly into the next question. Many people nowadays blame polarization on the internet and on our inhabiting echo chambers in which we're never exposed to evidence for contrasting views to our own. But the social psychologists and others whom you cite argue that evidence doesn't help, because when we're presented with counter-evidence, we work all the harder to discount evidence that conflicts with our own position. If exposure to evidence doesn't help, what does?
That's also a very tough question, a very good
Well,
one.
you don't have to solve all the world's problems
Yeah.
this evening, but
I hope so.
a little hint would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. In connection with what I've just said, I think that narratives are playing a big role here, but in the sense that they can connect, as I said, with certain experiences with certain perspectives. So there is a way of seeing this role played by narratives that I think that has to do with how narratives contribute to coordinate our perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we coordinate our perspectives not always has to do with providing arguments or providing facts or data, or no. Sometimes just helping other people to see things in a certain way, just having certain experiences or sharing certain situations can help for that. And I think that narratives play a big role on that. So
very good, thank you. So now a question with a little bit more of a personal slant. It was striking to me that writing a book on this subject, you were educated and are now in an academic position in Spain, when Spain, of course, underwent a bitter civil war less than a century ago. Does the fact that the civil war was followed by a seemingly less polarized period afterwards suggest that polarization can decrease as well as increase? And are there any lessons for us as to how to make it decrease in the future?
Easy, Edward. Wow. I think I'm going to insist on the role played by narratives because it's the only thing I have found right now that I feel all the time when working on these issues. I feel all the time frustrated because sometimes you have the impression that you start to get the essence of how certain actors are contributing to separate us, to divide us. And at the same time, you don't find a way to... So yeah, in the book, I try to argue that one way to intervene in the situation is just having tools that allow us to measure a polarization process at an early stage, because one of the things we know is that when the level of polarization is so high, it's really hard to decrease the... So yeah, I'm not sure how I would connect these ideas with the situation in Spain concerning the civil war and what happened exactly afterwards. But yeah, my answer would be just to insist on the role on narratives, and I'm starting to work now on a concept that I'm tentatively called curated narratives, and I think there is hope on that path. So,
I mean, would you agree that the sort of historical trajectory from a time of huge conflict to a time of greater consensus and then back to greater polarization again, at least suggests that the direction of change doesn't always have to be in one direction?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I tried to avoid your question was that I'm not sure if the things we are experiencing right now, and that those processes that we tend to call polarization are similar to the processes we had in the past. So I'm not sure about that. But honestly, I'm not sure. There are cues to think that maybe there are many similarities between things that happened in the past and what we are living now. But at the same time, I think there's something special of we are experiencing in contemporary democracy. So that's why, and again, I'm gonna avoid your.
Well, no, you're not avoiding it, but very interesting. There's plenty more to say, clearly. Well, thank you. Let's turn to our last author, Adam Lovett. Your book is entitled "Democratic Failures and the Ethics of Democracy." You too talk about the dangers of effective polarization, although I think if I read you right, you think ideological polarization is valuable for democracy, but I don't want to ask you about that. I want to ask you about the role of non-elected judges and officials, and you seem to see them, if I've read you rightly, as compromising democracy. How deep do you think democracy should go, and is there any room in a well-functioning democracy for unelected expertise?
So I think there are two valuable things about democracy. By that, I mean intrinsically valuable things about democracy. On the one hand, equality, on the other hand, autonomy.
Mm.
And really, the import of unelected judges, more generally like technocrats, like a meritocratic civil service, which is one of the great achievements of modern political order, they interact with these values in different ways. I think that's basically always an egalitarian objection to the power of unelected civil servants, judges, technocrats. Always had an objection to such people having a lot of power over how the rest of us live our lives and not being accountable through any electoral mechanism. Obviously, there's a trade-off there because having unelected civil servants is really good because I like having good policy. I like having competent kind of welfare programs, competent transportation. I like the trains running on time. So there you get a clear trade-off between equality and these instrumental goods. I think you should try and minimize the cost of equality. I think there are ways of doing that. The cost of equality of kind of empowering civil servants. Some ways of doing that is constraining them with rules, making decisions automatically. There are some other things you can do as well. The other really valuable thing I think is intrinsically key to democracy is autonomy. This kind of consists in us collectively having authorship of our kind of government affairs. So there, I think there's much less tension in principle between the power of unelected officials and this value. Why? Because among the things we want for our country is good government, competently run government, economic prosperity, etc. And one way to get that, one means to getting that is by empowering unelected officials. So really, there is a role for such people in any contemporary democracy. There are costs, and the key is minimizing the trade-offs that kind of those costs impose.
Great, thank you. Little bit like Manuel, you present some depressing evidence about voter competence. You talk about performance voting, and you also cite some statistics that say that incumbents tend to get punished by rainfall, either very low rainfall or exceptionally high rainfall, for which they're not responsible. Given the seeming irrationality of voter preferences and the capacity of campaigners to manipulate these preferences by negative campaigning, for example, how can we prevent democracy from becoming a race to the bottom?
Well, I think the answer to this question is maybe see my next book.
Give us a sneak preview.
So look, I think there are two kind of big kind of categories of problems with democracies. Elite level issues, which are to do with how kind of elected officials behave and their nature, the incentives they face. Those are often addressable by institutional design, not always, but often, but also mass level issues to do with how ordinary voters behave, what we know about politics, how we reason about it, what drives our vote. Those are much more difficult to address. So the first bucket of things, which unfortunately is not the one you asked about, addressable through institutional design. The second bucket of things is, I think you can ameliorate some issues here. You ameliorate, say, voter ignorance, which can include, connect to what drives people to vote. So one source of why people don't vote on policy is they don't know the policies of different parties. So you can ameliorate those things through civic education. We don't really do very much civic education in the UK. You do like a couple hours every 2 weeks or something. So other countries are similar. Australia has about 20 hours a week. US has these social studies classes, but they're mixed with history, etc. So civic education is important. Affecting the information environment is of course important. Having kind of strong public broadcasters, I think, is an important thing here. Kind of doing various other things to affect the information environment is valuable. But I think there's only so far you can go when it comes to affecting how ordinary voters behave. Why? Because the reason we don't know much about politics is ultimately, I think, because we have very little influence over elections, and so it doesn't make rational sense for us to learn that much about politics. And I think in this sort of context, you just have to reconcile yourself to the fact that we're never going to live in a perfect democracy. That's fine. We should reconcile ourselves to the non-ideal while trying to become more ideal.
Thank you. And now this last question also relates to the non-ideal nature of contemporary democracy. You say several times over that in a well-functioning democracy, there are certain constraints on how one may compete politically. But as you also maintain, democracy in the United States, at least, is not currently well-functioning. So what constraints remain? And do you favour, in this suboptimal configuration of US democracy, do you favour violence as a possible means of political competition?
So I definitely don't favour violence. I'm against political violence. Yeah, on the record. So the kind of constraints I'm interested in there are constraints that arise from the import of treating people as equals, especially. So the really important kind of issues here are not subordinating other people, not trying to get asymmetric power over other people, kind of caring about our fellow citizens' interests, trying to act in ways that promote everyone's interests in that are kind of publicly justifiable, to use the kind of Rawlsian term. I think these are the kind of constraints that are undermined by certain democratic failures. So the particular thing I say in the book is that what undermines these constraints is a kind of polarization, specifically a kind of asymmetric polarization that has occurred in the United States. And by that, I don't really mean the kind of affective phenomena that Manuel is interested in. That's part of what I mean, but not just that. I mean the way in which, in the US context, the really important things here are the ways in which, especially the Republican Party, has undermined democracy. Think about the kind of January 6th riots, coup attempt, kind of inept coup attempt, but a coup attempt. Various programs of voter suppression, various attempts to undermine the information environment and to undermine elections. So I think that in the US context, that's been largely asymmetrical. Not entirely, but largely asymmetrical, i.e. the Republican Party got really extreme during the early 90s and then embarked on these democracy undermining kind of programs. And I think that's what affects, that undermines the obligations that living up to the ideals of civic friendship or equality would ordinarily impose on their competition in the US Democrats. It's not very important right now because the Republicans have total control of American government. But yeah, so to kind of sum up this point, I think the ways in which democratic failures affect how we're allowed to compete politically are nuanced. They depend who you are. They depend on who you are, what you've done in the past. And it's not like we're allowed to engage in political violence because murder is still wrong, regardless of whether it's subordinating or not. But we are allowed to do some other things. So, for instance, there are proposals to say, expand the Supreme Court in the United States, or get rid of, say, minority vetoes like the Senate filibuster and things like this. I think these things would be totally fine for Democrats to do. So that's what I mean when I say the duties to which political competitors are affected by democratic failures.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for answering these, I hope not too difficult questions. Certainly very interesting answers. Let's give them all a round of applause.
Before I start, I really love every single one of your books, and I think I speak for the whole panel to urge everyone to to read them. They're really magnificent. Thank you all. There are different ways of understanding the term transdisciplinary philosophy. To some, it may appear as an oxymoron. To others, it may sound like a statement of conviction, like green philosophy, Christian philosophy, or Republican philosophy in either sense of the term. And I imagine most of us here believe in transdisciplinarity in this sense, but I think the term does something more. It invites, it tells us that whatever disciplines might be transcended, the works shortlisted today, like many others we considered, are ultimately works of philosophy. This is the third year the prize has been running, but it is the first year in which TRIP specified particular categories for the prize, as in inviting publishers to consider books in those categories. And this was a way of helping them realize that many of their authors were transdisciplinary philosophers. These categories were philosophy of human nature and scientific innovation, philosophy of transdisciplinary methodologies, philosophy of the future of humanity, philosophy of frontier risks and disruptive technologies, and philosophy of global governance and transcultural understanding. This year's winner somehow managed to transcend our own categories. Perhaps it makes their book transcategorial as well as transdisciplinary, combining ethics, biology, neuroscience, and psychology, and replete with insights into risk, precaution, AI, the nature of humans and other animals, consciousness, agency, and of course, sentience. I would like to congratulate, you've probably guessed by now, Jonathan Birch for winning this year's prize. We'll give you a moment to collect your thoughts while I hand out the other everyone will get an award, and then you can come hopefully speak of it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I am going to carry on with the remaining prizes. I'm sticking to the order of the brochure. There is no runner-up or anything like that. So this is not an order. Manuel Almagro. Jules Holroyd. Peter Godfrey Smith is not here, but I believe Maria Kalinescu is here. Thank you. I'm just helping myself to prizes here. Adam Lovett. Jonathan, there you are. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Konstantin. It's really, really wonderful to receive this prize. So exciting to get a real physical trophy. I was in no way expecting that. This is fantastic. Thank you so much as well to the Royal Institute of Philosophy and Nayef Al-Rodhan for sponsoring this award. I was reading just this week a book called The Fly and the Fly Bottle by Ved Mehta from the early 1960s, which is a wonderful portrait of Oxford linguistic philosophy around that time, essentially the heyday of what we might call monodisciplinary philosophy. The questions being asked, very, very hard to understand outside the discipline. The solutions, the ingenious solutions being created to those questions, hotly debated within the discipline, but really, really hard to make sense of for anyone on the outside. And the methods, primarily armchair reflection in fellows' parlours, ideally with lots of port, and engaging with some other disciplines, notably linguistics, but very limited in the engagement with other disciplines. And in spite of what may seem very inauspicious features, that era produced really wonderful work. We read books by Strawson and by Anscombe, and we think, wow, those are classics. We still enjoy them today, 60 years later. But I don't think that's what the discipline is now. I think we're in a new era now. This prize is very aptly named because I think we are moving into an era of transdisciplinary philosophy, an era where the questions, the solutions, and the methods are different. The questions are questions that affect all of us. Huge questions about the future of our species, about how we respond to challenges that threaten our very existence, challenges of polarization, challenges of the crisis of democracy, challenges of justice and oppression. Of course, questions about how to handle risks of developing new forms of sentient being that I wrote about in this book. The solutions, of course, are very different because the solutions to those challenges will not be dreamt up in armchairs by philosophers working by themselves. We have to work with other disciplines to create real solutions. In my own center, that means working with people from evolutionary biology, from neuroscience, from comparative psychology, from economics, from law, from computer science, from AI. Philosophy, to me, remains central, but it's not alone. It's central because we can develop the conceptual frameworks and the ethical frameworks and the metaphysical frameworks that can bring all of those other disciplines together to develop solutions to these problems. And of course, the methods are different as well, because the methods cannot be purely sitting in the armchair anymore. It's necessary to build bridges. It's necessary to develop new concepts, new kinds of language that can reach across disciplinary divides, which is what I try to do in the Edge of Sentience book with concepts like the sentience candidate concept. And this era is very different, but this era is also incredibly exciting. And I'm so pleased that the Royal Institute of Philosophy is supporting it with a prize like this, a prize for transdisciplinary philosophy. And it's been such an honor and a privilege to be on a shortlist with these authors of such wonderful books that, to me, exemplify what this new era for the discipline is. So I'd like to thank, again, the Royal Institute of Philosophy and all of the judges who worked so hard on this prize, everyone who was involved, including those organizing this event today. Thank you so much for doing that. It really means a lot to me. And thank you too to my family, especially my wife Caroline and my mum and dad. My dad's here today. And my colleagues at the LSE, especially Ali, who's here today. Wonderful environment we have in LSE Philosophy for supporting this kind of work, and I couldn't have done it without them. I'd also like to thank Peter Momchilov from Oxford University Press, who commissioned the book in the first place back in 2021. I think it was among the last books that he commissioned in his time at OUP. He was there for around 30 years commissioning philosophy books. So he saw in that time those changes that I've been describing. And so I'm really grateful that he took a risk on this book and commissioned something that probably when he started in the job in the early 1990s, he never would have commissioned at all. And thanks as well to my funders, thanks to the European Research Council that supported the writing of this book and also supported making it open access, which means anybody can go and download a copy from the internet right now, from the OUP website. I think it's been hugely important because it's a book of proposals, a book of how we can manage risk better than we do. And it's just so important to me that those proposals reach the broadest possible audience, which open access makes possible. So thanks very much, and thanks for listening.
We're going to start drinking and eating soon. But I just wanted to thank the authors for jumping over those boundaries that sometimes philosophy sets itself, for being prepared to be cross-examined by Edward, I wanted to thank the judges for their just the huge amount of work. I mean, the good news this year is that we got many more books coming in, but that's many more books for the judges to read. So I want to thank them for their extraordinary work. Constantine thanked Edward and Melanie and Philip and Nisa and Julia, but there are two missing thank yous that I want to fill in. One is the Royal Institute has, under Melanie's guidance, started a program of volunteering opportunities, and we have something like 50 volunteers, people who give their time freely to us. But I want to name in particular our two interns, Georgia Hoyle and Bianca Tripoli, and also our volunteers tonight, John Robinson and Aaron Turan. And then the other missing thank you, of course, was to our chair of judges, to Constantine himself. So if we can close the proceedings with a round of applause, and then we'll have a drink and eat some food.